Hello, I'm Suzanne James. Welcome to another discussion on all things voluntary assisted dying. Today we will be talking about dying at home. A Productivity Commission report found that of the 70% of people who wanted to die at home, only 10% would be able to do so. Obviously, the reasons for that are complex, including housing security, family structure, and available care work. So to talk us through some of that today, we'll be joined again by Dr. Nick Carr. Dr. Carr is a senior clinical lecturer at Melbourne University. He's one of the first doctors in Victoria to train for voluntary assisted dying, and he's also on the board of Dying with Dignity Victoria. He joins us now from Melbourne. Dr. Carr, welcome and thank you for your time.
Yeah, lovely to be talking with you again, Suzanne.
Now, a lot of people are afraid of the concept of somebody dying at home. There's additional paperwork and concerns about being wrongfully accused of death and things. So tell us what your experience is in relation to it.
It's a paradox, isn't it, Suzanne? We know that most people want to die at home, and yet the overwhelming majority don't. And there are lots of complicated reasons why this is. Funny enough, I was given a clue to this at the World Federation of Right to Die Societies conference in Ireland last year. The Irish said, we're very good at death. We do wakes fantastically, but we're not so good at the dying. And I think this is true worldwide. While we can deal with things after someone's dead, the actual process of dying and the moment of death itself, we struggle with. So lots of people get scared, even health services, aged care facilities and so on. When someone's deteriorating, they're often too nervous to deal with it at home, and they send people off to hospital. It's the rare aged care facility that's comfortable letting people die at their facility. Same with people at home. People get sick suddenly. People get scared. They call an ambulance. And of course, as doctors, we want to try and help. And tendency is to get people into hospital and try and fix them, even when there's not much help. So the system is really geared around people dying in a hospital type environment rather than at home. So multiple factors at play, but sadly it is reality. That's what happens.
It is a hard call too, and you could never judge anybody for not wishing to take it on. It's a very difficult job, especially when it's someone that obviously is a loved one. But there is some things that can help alleviate the issues, such as forward planning. Now, we've recently had Advanced Care Planning Week. A lot of people are now discussing advanced care planning and living wills and medical decision makers and whatnot, which it's good to see that in the public discourse. So let's talk about the advanced care planning. Can you explain to us what an advanced care plan is, what an advanced care directive is within that, and also the very important matter of appointing a medical decision maker?
Yeah, really important points. And one of the things we need to be clear about at the start is that the legislation, the paperwork does differ between each state and territory. I live in Victoria. That's my area of expertise. I'm going to talk about the Victorian system. It's similar in other states, but not exactly the same. So just keep that in mind. In a general sense, advanced care planning refers to the whole concept of thinking ahead about what are my wishes, what would be my preferences. And you can actually write what's called an advanced care plan, which is a non-formal, not legally binding document, but still a useful document to say, this is what I would prefer if I became infirm and non-competent myself. And discussing what your plans are, what your preferences are with family, with health providers, is always a good thing to do. But an advanced care plan, in that sense, is more an informal document, has no legal standing. Here in Victoria, an advanced care directive is in a couple of parts, which is both what's called a value statement and then an instructional directive. And this should be actually quite a protracted process, because people need to talk about this. They need to talk about it with their families. They need to discuss it, family and friends. They need to talk about it with their health providers, and then fill in the paperwork. And a values directive gives an indication of what are the things that matter to me. What do I want towards the end of my life? What are the kind of treatments I'm happy with, and what would I prefer not to have? But then comes the instructional directive, and this is the legally binding document where you say, all right, in the event that I have a catastrophic brain injury, for instance, with no hope of recovery, I would not accept CPR, or I would not accept intubation or artificial nutrition, this sort of thing. And these, of course, these are complicated decisions, and people might need advice. So we might go on and talk about where people get that information from.
How do they put this together as a family sitting around the kitchen table, whether someone's sick or not, whether someone's considering VAD or not?
Yeah, so the first process is that conversation to be had with family, and if necessary with your health professionals. And it is complicated, and there's lots of information. Advanced Care Planning Australia has a wonderful website with information, which gives you state-specific information as well. So if you're not sure what's available in your area, that's where you can look it up and get the proper information. Advanced Care Planning Australia. Most of the local hospitals have advanced care planning units. My local hospital, the Alfred, certainly does. And you can contact them and get information, support and advice from them. The paperwork, you can write this on any old piece of paper, but they're much better to do it on a document that someone else has prepared for you. And they're available again from the Office of the Public Advocate, from Advanced Care Planning Australia. Dying with Dignity, we have paperwork examples of how to do this. So there's plenty of information out there. And of course, if go and talk to your GP. Most GPs have done this many times with their patients.
And also the palliative care team, I found when we were going through the end-of-life process, they were extremely helpful in terms of what paperwork was necessary. There's also a lot of drugs involved. If someone, for example, as home as my partner was, on morphine under palliative care, and also additional, again, obviously, if voluntary assisted dying is involved. So as a doctor, tell us about, I know you're in Victoria, but just your own experience about how much extra paperwork do you need to do when someone dies at home, and what's the involvement of the family in that? Why is all that paperwork necessary?
Yeah, actually here in Victoria, there isn't a huge amount of extra paperwork. It's more around the managing the complexities of medications and so on at home, because palliative care at home is quite complicated. A lot of GPs won't do much of that. And this is one of the issues, is that not many GPs these days will do house calls and help manage palliative care at home. And that's where our palliative care services can be very helpful. But managing those sorts of medications is a specialist job. And we often need guidance with that. In terms of paperwork, if someone dies at home, they do need someone to certify they're actually dead before funeral directors can take the body. That can be a doctor, it can be a paramedic, it doesn't have to be a GP. But then the actual death certificate itself is the same as any other. So here in Victoria, the paperwork isn't that complicated. It's more people's reluctance to be involved.
So you mentioned that doctors won't make house calls. So what are the blockers for doctors doing that?
I think it's simply the cost and the time, and to some extent habit. When I started general practice 4 decades ago, when it was pretty standard stuff that GPs would provide house calls, and that has really changed. Locum services have taken over much of that kind of work. So I think it's just an evolution in how the profession is working. And then people look at it, it's certainly not going to earn a lot of money doing individual house calls. And so from a business perspective, better to outsource that to someone else. A bit sad, really.
I'd like to talk to you now about what happens after the person has passed away. Now, we have a terrific service in Australia known as Griefline. They're the only grief-free online and phone grief service in Australia of its kind. I understand Griefline has a VAD-specific service. Tell us about how that came about and why it was seen as necessary.
Yes, this was an initiative of Dying with Dignity Victoria, because we realised that there were people saying that ordinary grief services didn't have much experience with grief after voluntary assisted dying. What the research tells us is that in a general sense, grief after a VAD death is as good or even better than a regular death, but that doesn't mean people don't need help and support. And I'll give you an example. I had a woman who was German with her partner who lived here in Australia. He died through VAD. She went back to Germany and contacted me 6 months later in great distress from Germany, saying, particularly in a country where VAD wasn't legal or an option, no one there understood what it was like to have a partner who died through voluntary assisted dying. And she just found it very hard to get support. And even in this country where voluntary assisted dying has been legal for nearly 6 years here in Victoria, there's not much experience in some of the grief services. So there is an advantage in having a service that's an expert in grief, supported by people who know about voluntary assisted dying. And that's what we set up through Dying with Dignity as a kind of pilot program. I'm glad to say with the reprieve for Griefline, at least for 12 months, that is still running, and we hope that will continue and maybe taken up in other states as well.
On a happier note now, I'd like to talk to you about your canine support program down there with Ollie and Mia. Now, I love these canine support programs. They fulfill a number of functions the world over with children in court and inmates being able to train rescue dogs for various assistance tasks, and also your good organisation with Ollie and Mia. Now, tell us how that all came about and what role Ollie and Mia now play.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of this. And in fact, when I was working on ABC television 25 years ago, I did a story on therapy dogs going into hospitals. First time I'd actually seen it in action. And I saw what the connection between canine and patient did in terms of communication. I was absolutely blown away. And as someone who can't walk past a dog on the street without having to pat it and say hello, I'm naturally a huge fan. So when Danielle Jacobs, who's now on the board of Dying with Dignity, and who's been working with rescue dogs as therapy dogs for years and years and years, taking them into palliative care, and I knew what kind of help and relief she was giving people in that circumstances. We were so delighted when she was on board with them joining Dying with Dignity as our therapy VAD and end-of-life dogs. So Mia and Ollie, they're huge, great creatures. I thought we were going to get these little scruffy terrier things, but no. These are big, sort of gorgeous wolfhoundy kind of dogs, as gentle as anything. They've been to numbers of meetings now. They've already done their work in palliative care with people, and we're looking forward to seeing how they'll be able to help some of our patients going through the VAD process.
It's a fantastic program. And of course, you've also got your Young Ambassadors program, which I understand is now looking to spread its wings nationally as well. Is that right?
It's an extraordinary initiative, this one, and just has been blossoming in the last 18 months to 2 years with some unbelievably motivated young people who, not surprisingly, perhaps have come to the concept of voluntary assisted dying through connections, through friends, relatives, sometimes their own peer group, sometimes through parents and so on. And these young people, they bring the sorts of skills which the older members of Dying with Dignity maybe are not quite so strong on. And they bring a passion and a motivation and an eagerness to be involved, which is just extraordinary. And we started off here in Victoria, the numbers are increasing, and now we're looking at developing the Young Ambassador program throughout the country. Watch this space. I mean, they are an amazing group of young people.
Dying with Dignity, like so many other not-for-profits such as Griefline and many others, do so much with so little. How do you fund your operations at Dying with Dignity? Where does the money come from for all of this?
Well, we do have subscriptions, which are pretty modest. Most of our money comes from people's donations, quite often from bequests. So people who've been through this and seen voluntary assisted dying in process have left us money. We don't need a huge amount of money. Everyone on the board is a volunteer. There's no one being paid apart from our office manager and a few skeleton staff who keep the place running. But like all of these sorts of small voluntary organizations, for instance, our work with Griefline required a certain amount of money. We're so grateful for people who do donate to us because it enables us to do some of these sorts of programs which otherwise we wouldn't be able to.
And if you'd like to donate to Dying with Dignity, go to their website and I'm sure you can find the links that you can donate for your. Well, thank you very much, Dr. Carr, for joining us today.
Thank you, Suzanne, and always lovely to talk to you.
That was Dr. Nick Carr from Dying with Dignity Victoria. I'm Suzanne James. Thank you for joining us.